Welcome to the podcast today. Today's guests are Freddie Guerra. He is the North American digital water leader for GHD, and Rick
Yeah.
Relyea. And he is our North American water loss smart water lead, and he has over 18 years of experience. Freddie's got over 30 years experience in the business. So, we've got a lot of experience here on the call today. We're here to talk about advanced metering infrastructure and the technology innovations around that and how GHD is helping clients solve those problems. So, Freddie or Rick, let's dive into the conversation here. What is advanced metering infrastructure for the listeners?
Thanks, Sean, and great to be here, of course. In a short nutshell.
Welcome to the podcast today. Today's guests are Freddie Guerra. He is the North American digital water leader for GHD. And we have Rick Real. I should have said this right. Rick, let's pronounce your last name for us, buddy.
Relyea.
Relyea. There we go. Rick
Yeah.
Relyea. And he is our North American water loss smart water lead, and he has over 18 years of experience. Freddie's got over 30 years experience in the business. So, we've got a lot of experience here on the table or on the call today. We're here to talk about advanced metering infrastructure and the technology innovations around that and how GHD is helping clients solve those problems. So, Freddie, or Rick, let's dive into the conversation here. What is advanced metering infrastructure for the listeners?
Thanks, Sean, and great to be here, of course. In a short nutshell, data on your water usage is collected at your meter, and that data is then encrypted and sent via a signal to a collector, and that could be something on a water tank. It could be a cellular. It could be any number of things. And then the water utility receives that secure data on regular intervals, typically every 15 minutes. And then it's sent to the utility billing system to create a bill for the customer. And that data can also be used to identify suspected leaks, irregular water patterns, water pressure issues, or trends in water use that could be used to help the facility improve efficiency. And then that water data can also be used can be available to view through a customer portal, and then the customer can see their water use. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Okay. So, like where I live, we have a water utility, and I know that, do they just take daily readings, monthly readings? I mean, I'm assuming it's like a monthly, reading of how much water I consume. At least that's what comes out on my bill. So I was curious, is there advantages of having, very granular readings with this AMI infrastructure?
Well, absolutely. If you're trying to, typically if you're doing a just the old style manual reading, which there are many utilities using right now, a very big one in Washington, you're getting one read. It could be every quarter, and that so nobody's seeing the trends in their water use and how their water is being used. If you can get a water read every 15 minutes, then the utility and the customer can see maybe there's a pattern of water loss. Maybe somebody, the utility can use that information to call the customer and say, hey, you've had continuous water use for 48 hours. Maybe somebody left a hose bib on in the backyard. That's simple. So there's a lot of customer relations involved. And if you get the more reads you get, the more you can use that data, as I discussed earlier, for leak detection, for pressure management, for things like that.
Sure. No. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And you talk about people and some utilities still doing the old school. Like I've got the water guy, the meter, maid coming out and checking my meter, and I think, like you said, there are still people doing that, but
Yeah.
how Freddie has this evolved over the past 15 years with utilities and potentially utilizing AMI to help their business.
Well, Sean, great question, and thank you again for having us on this morning. One thing I wanted to mention is that these initial deployments have occurred between 2005 and 2012. So it's taking a while for the technology to evolve, but it's evolving quickly in the past 5 years. And I'll just give you some quick examples. In the past, what we were talking about originally, those smart meters would only transmit information one way. So there was only one-way communication.
Okay.
Now with the evolution of AMI 2.0 and beyond AMI, we now have the ability to have two-way communication. So what does that really mean? So for example, if a utility wanted to ping a meter, they could just press a button and get that information. So, if they wanted to know what the water consumption was, 2 hours, into the future, they could ping it then and get that information. But more importantly, there's also added features to these smart meters. Some now have remote close valves. So
Oh,
now the utility can just press a button and slowly close that valve to shut off water at a home. So again, that's the value of the two-way communication. The other way this has evolved too is now a lot of utilities, consultants, vendors, and contractors are now viewing smart meters as the backbone for a smart water utility. So now, instead of looking at a water meter as a meter, now we really look at it as a sensor. And we'll talk
right.
about this later, but some of these water meters now have sensors that are able to register temperature, pressure, along with water consumption. So imagine, a city that deploys maybe 10,000 meters or 500,000 meters, like Miami-Dade County will be doing in the near future, having the ability to now understand where water's being used, how it's being used, and why it's being used will allow them to optimize their system and really drive better decision making. And then the last few things I was going to mention too is, a big part of how AMI has evolved is through analytics and machine learning. When you think about it, and what Rick had mentioned, there's some utilities that only take 1 meter read every month. And believe it or not, there's some in the US that take 1 meter read every 3 months. So imagine now having the ability to collect data points every 15 minutes. What are you going to do with all that data? Well, now we have the ability to analyze that information. And like Rick had mentioned, start analyzing that data, identifying different patterns, also predicting. So through this, we now have the ability to understand what's going on, predict what may happen, and if something does happen, what do we do? And then
Wow.
the last evolution of AMI today is really about customer engagement.
Yep.
In the past, really the way AMI originated was, especially in the state of California, is that they wanted the ability or give the ability to customers to understand how much energy they were using. And that translated into or transitioned into the water industry. So now it's no longer about knowing how much water you're consuming, but how and when, and really how can I use my water more efficiently? How can I conserve it? So now it's about changing behavior versus just knowing how much water you're using.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Great take on that.
Hey, Sean, can I just add one thing? Sorry.
Yeah,
Um,
go ahead, Rick.
there's also a couple factors of safety involved. We've been working some with agency in DC that has 400,000 meters. Those are all read manually, and they're the greatest workman's compensation claims that come are from those guys that are out there manually reading the meters.
Mm.
They're walking streets, from, I don't know, getting hit by a car, or different things like that,
Tripping
or
over something and,
tripping over
right.
something very simple.
Maybe
And
getting
they're out there.
mugged,
Yeah. And then, as Freddie was mentioning with the remote shutoff, depending on what areas you go into, we did a project actually in South Central LA quite a few years ago when I was with my previous firm. And, those are not the safest areas to go into. And when you have to go shut somebody's water off, and you're manually doing that, you never know what you're going to run into.
Oh,
And by being able to do that remotely, it can help your staff also in a safety.
well, yeah, I mean, just think about it. If you're a utility, and especially in a big municipality,
Yeah.
um, renters are changing homes and their locations constantly, turning the water off, turning it on. I mean, a utility probably is nonstop, always busy with, shutting on or turning on water, shutting off and turning on. That to me is like a huge benefit to have the ability just to hit the button, turn it off. They stop clocking the water going into the place. They can bill them appropriately, close out the account. I mean, that's got to be a big deal.
It is, and also one other thing, if your staff is spending all their time reading meters, and also that one in DC, the amount of rereads they have to do because they go out and manually read it, then they come back, and then the customer calls them up and says, "Hey, why is my water usage so high?" Well, who knows why? Maybe Johnny left, the hose bib on in the backyard, but they have to send a person out there again to do a reread and look
Right.
at the meter, and that can all be changed with AMI. And you can then use your staff for more important things like checking for leaks, doing your valve turning exercises. There's all kinds of things that your staff can be doing, your field staff, that they're not doing. And as we know, the utilities can't just keep hiring people to do different things. They need to use their staff, in the right way.
Sure, sure. Well, kind of like a lot of the topics or I guess the concerns around the need to have AMI, how is ESG driving the water sector and utilities to assess or reassess their priorities in this space by really actually adopting and deploying AMI?
I think it comes down to two things, really about water affordability. And you hear a lot about this throughout North America. Can a household or individual really afford to pay their water bill? And through AMI, that really helps because again, you can ping your water usage every day,
Mhm.
every hour if you wanted, but you get a better understanding of how much water you're exactly using, and then you can manage your bill at the end of the month so that if you do have a $200-300 bill, you understand that it's going to happen versus it just coming in the mail at the end of the month and really not knowing how much water you've been using. So really, I think it helps address water affordability. And then the other big one too is water equity. So water affordability is the financial side of it. Water equity is really about being fair and just. Does everybody have the same level of service? So by installing these AMI systems throughout an entire city, town, or utility, you're ensuring that everybody gets the same level of service. Everybody's
Gotcha.
going to get that same read, be able to tap into their phones, their meters via their phones to get that information. And then also, again, when there's extreme weather event, the possibility of a utility or city shutting down those meters to ensure there's no cross contamination. But again, when you look at ESG and the way AMI is supporting that, it's really through ensuring water affordability and water equity.
Well, I was going to touch on water scarcity too, right? I mean, what about that? That seems to be a risk there as well that it could help out with.
And that's correct. So, I live in North Texas, and just recently in the past 10 years, they built two new reservoirs here, which is really unheard of. And it's really due to water demand and that water supply in the future and addressing water scarcity. But
Hmm.
again, with AMI, you know how much water you're using. You can manage your water use more efficiently, conserve water. So again, AMI does have a big impact on addressing water scarcity.
Gotcha. Well, Rick, hey, why are some utilities slow to adopt AMI?
Well, and there's lots of there's lots of reasons. We've run across different agencies where they don't want to have their staff lose their jobs. These guys are out walking and doing water meters. We try to convince them that they're not gonna. They just have to be reassigned to do different things. But that can be a big driver. Just that simple thing of you've got 15 guys that are out reading meters, and they're all going to lose their jobs, and their managers don't want them to do that. There can be, it's a cost. I mean, if you're looking at $500 per meter to go to AMI, 400,000 meters is a $200 million project. That's a very big project, and there's other job. We're working with a agency down in Lake Forest in Southern California where they say, hey, we have these other projects we need to do. We have to spend money on. It could be a technology issue. They have to change all their systems. Possibly. Do their existing systems, will they work with the new AMI system?
Yeah.
Or do they have to change out their current billing system? Do they have to change out some of their other software programs?
So
And
it sounds like it's a kind of a complex evaluation that needs to take place for utility to adopt it because, like you said, you've got financial interests,
Yeah.
you've got technology interests, you've got, data management interests, you've got, how do I synthesize this data for management purposes? I mean, there seems to be a lot to go into making this change, but it seems to me though, at the end of the day, the ROI for the deployment of AMI, I think, I mean, just on the surface outweighs a lot of these, these stumbling blocks, right? Where,
Right.
utilities are struggling. How are we positioning this ROI in a way, with GHD, with our clients to really, embrace this technology?
Well,
So,
I would just say one thing. Sorry, Fred, and you can jump in, but I think it goes all the way back to water loss. I mean, and that's a big part, and that's where AMI can help. I mean, there are agencies, we're working in, like in Qatar, there's Saipan, there's all kinds in America where you have over 50% water loss. So you're
Oh,
losing, you're pumping that water or pulling it in, you're treating that water, so there's energy, chemicals, you're sending that water out into your system and losing half of it. If you were driving your car and you filled up your gas tank and only half of the gas made it in and the rest spilled out, you would freak out, right? And
yes.
so I think AMI, can help with that. And what it does is, when you're doing your feasibility study and looking at your business case and looking at your return on investment, that's the first thing you do, is you look at your water loss. Maybe you start testing your waters, you make sure your data is correct, and then you move on from there. And that's a big driver, I think, that coming from the water loss industry.
Ready?
Freddie has something to say too.
yeah, so Sean, going back to your question about ROI and efficiency, I think some of the other things too, that Rick had mentioned too, the biggest one is operational efficiency. So
Right.
we do look at water loss. It's about apparent losses and real losses. So what are apparent losses? That's really if is your meter underperforming? Is it turning in the right direction and at the right speed? There's a lot of consensus out there that meters begin to degrade over a certain period, which may or may not be true. But the thing is when we look at return on investment and efficiency, it is about water loss. It's about apparent losses and underperforming meters and real losses in your distribution system. But really, where the greatest returns come in is, again, if you have a large crew that goes out and actually reads the meters. Obviously, there's a significant cost savings by having them reskilled and retooled to do other things. I think the other things that when we look at ROI and efficiency, it's about improved billing. So as I mentioned before, some of these meters are underperforming. So you may be losing revenue in that regard. So again, having the ability to have new meters registered correctly, you're recapturing that lost revenue. And then a few other things about ROI, when you look at customer engagement is another big one too, is you're actually deploying the system to enhance customer experience. So the more people that you have participating in your portal, using that information, your return on investment is going to be greater. And then the last thing I was going to mention is really about system optimization. It's not only about better meter reading and billing,
Right.
but really it's optimizing your system with this information. Like I mentioned, now you know where the demand is occurring.
Right.
Is your pressure too high, or are your pumps, pumping full speed when there's no demand?
Right.
But really understanding that you can optimize your system. So that's part of that payback too.
And identifying where those leaks are too, so you could send crews out to solve those, problems where they're happening. That would be huge, great information to have at your fingertips. When I think about it, all this information comes in. What about adopting some sort of a platform for a utility to take this information, to manage it properly, to train them on? Because that to me seems to be probably a piece that we're not, we're kind of haven't really discussed yet. But how do utilities adopt a platform that, with all this information coming into the system, because they're not going to be sophisticated enough to create one for sure, right? So talk a little bit about how, or what's out there in the industry for that.
So initially, that there are meter management data systems that AMI vendors will provide, and really that's all that information coming into one location.
Right.
To help you manage the meter health and kind of look at consumption patterns. But the real thing that utilities should be looking for in the near future, and some are already doing this, is leveraging a smart water platform. And really, it's a digital twin. So now
Right.
you have the ability of bringing in all your AMI information into the centralized platform, GIS, work order system, SCADA information, going all into one central location. So now you have visibility of what's going on, not only from a meter reading and billing perspective, but really in operations. Again, knowing what's out there. So you're starting to see a lot of AMI vendors pair up with software providers that provide these overarching platforms. And one great example of that is what Census and Xylem are doing. They recently partnered with GoAgua, which is, I consider, one of the leading platforms for a digital twin. But they have the ability, again, to bring in that AMI information. Like I mentioned before, smart meters are really the backbone of a smart water utility. But without having that overarching platform, you're never going to have visibility or control and having that ability to really optimize your systems.
Gotcha. So there are tools and solutions out there to help utilities manage this, but I guess now a utility is going to have to hire a really sophisticated, smart, digital person to actually manage this business for them too, because a lot of these guys are rural communities. They don't really have a big pool of talent to pull from. They really can dive into these types of capabilities. What does a utility do with that?
So, that's a good question. And more and more, like I had mentioned, a lot of the initial AMI developments were really AMR or deployments were automated meter reading. So basically, it's a truck going through a neighborhood, collecting that information. So now you're seeing many utilities now look at advanced metering infrastructure. And you'll see a solicitation every week from utilities throughout North America. So, they all want to pivot to that new technology. But as Rick had mentioned, some of the challenges is really understanding, are you going to pick the right technology? And then also, once you pick the right technology, do you have the ability to manage that data? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to optimize your system or increase reliability of your system? So that's really where consultants like GHD Digital come in. We'll establish a roadmap initially, and we'll use some of our digital solutions to tell clients exactly where they need to start through some of our solutions. And then everything that we do is really connected through that roadmap. So we'll help identify underperforming meters, know where we need to start with those installations, and then we'll start getting into the distribution system, looking at pipes. How do you manage your pressure? How do you manage your leaks? How do you improve water quality? So through this roadmap that we initially developed for cities and utilities, really sets us apart from our competitors, because again, it shows where you need to start. It really explains why you're starting,
Right.
and then shows that vision of where you would like to be 5-10 years from now.
So are there challenges with getting this information from the utilities so we can assist them with developing this roadmap for them? I mean, talk a little bit about that. I got to imagine there's some there.
I'm going to defer to Rick on
Rick,
that, and
what do
I'll
you
just
think,
add to that.
bud?
Well, it can be, and you'll come across. So just as a tiny aside, we also do water audits for California agencies. I live in California. So, everybody that has over 3,000 connections is required to do a water audit. So when you do that water audit, you look at their data, and you just realize how inaccurate that data can be and how hard it can be to get the data. And if you talk about internationally, in Qatar, we're doing water loss and meter work there. It's almost impossible to get data. And they'll tell you, hey, we're going to get you our data. Even in Saipan, that's happening also. But it's the accuracy of that data. And I think that's where our digital practice comes into play, because we can take that data, we can look at it, and we can determine how that data is inaccurate. I mean, you have to have accurate data before you start these projects.
Yeah.
It works out. It takes time, and then we look at all the data to see, and we have enough experience to know kind of how that data is inaccurate, if that makes sense. And we can help them to clean that up before they start. And that's another reason that is positive in going to AMI, because whether it's having all your distribution system and everything GPSed, so you know where everything is, from valves to hydrants. That also, when you go to AMI, that also happens as well. When
So
you're installing meters, you're GPSing, the coordinates and where those meters are, rather than just having things what they call georeferenced, which is just based on an address.
gotcha.
So,
So it sounds like there's opportunities to help utilities
yeah.
with just getting their data collection house in order, so to speak, because then they can have, an opportunity to have somebody like us come and assess that information and that data and analyze it and have, a more informed decision on where is the best way to, or what is the best way to deploy AMI, where that we see inefficiencies, things like that. So even if they even don't go down the AMI path, it sounds like there's a service just to get their data in order. Is that accurate? Fair to say?
Sean,
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Freddie. I was just going to say one more thing. And also, when you look at all that, it can help determine some of the smaller agencies. Maybe they don't go to an AMI. Maybe they just stick with an AMR because they have areas. There's some disadvantaged communities, kind of where I live, where they want their guys out in the field looking at those meters and
Right.
looking around, and because people will go in and mess with the meter. There's all kinds of things like that. But anyway, go ahead, Freddie. I was just
no, I was going to mention, the other challenges that utilities have, and we go through this process when we do the cost benefit analysis and these AMI feasibility studies for our clients. But really, when you look at an organization like a utility, some of the information we need may be in billing, other information is in customer service, planning, operation and maintenance. So that's the other challenge too, is we hear this all the time about breaking down those data silos, because
Yeah.
a lot of these cities and utilities store that information in different silos. And that's, the other main point too, how we could help clients is that it's really, breaking down those silos and sharing that data, because, they may not move forward with an AMI solution, but if that data is being shared, understanding again where water is being used, why it's being used, the problems they had from a maintenance perspective, if all that was shared and they all had one common, visibility or source of truth, it would help improve operations, collaboration within a utility.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
So
that's
question.
sorry, one more thing. That's an interesting take that Freddie's talking about, because there's agencies, one that we're working with right now down near Riverside, where all the departments are very cohesive. They work together, they meet together, they share all their information, and it really works well. Where there's other agencies where they just, this department's over there and this department's over here. They don't really share the data. So if there's a guy out in the field and he's updating, who knows, a customer service line or something, the other a different department, maybe the GIS department, doesn't ever get that information that pipe was upgraded and replaced. And so then when you're asking these agencies for that data, you're getting, it's not apples, to apples, it's apples to kiwi or something, where you're
Oranges.
just kind of like going, well, this says this and this says this. And
Right.
part of what we do, though, in our feasibility and business case is to, scrub all that and to figure all that out.
Gotcha.
So,
Well, we talked about creating basically a digital twin of a utilities infrastructure, so maybe talk a little bit, Freddie, like how has GHD helped utilities in that space, assisting with the development of a quote unquote digital twin of the utility system, and how that connects to potentially a platform of some sort that, that they may need to use, or does it work that way? Or do we have to do it in a platform systems that they end up adopting? So talk a little bit about how that process works, or
So,
if we're doing that service.
yeah, so we do provide that service. And again, it's through a visioning or a road mapping for an AMI system. So, not only do we help out with the helping utilities understand the technology and, whether they should invest in it or not, and looking at the benefits of it. The other thing that we provide is a roadmap. And like I mentioned before, is like, where do you start? And what are the really true benefits of this? Obviously, we all know it's going to enhance customer experience, but how does it empower and enable my staff to do a better job? So through this roadmap, we start showing the different connections. It's about people, data, and processes. So as we start connecting all this, utilities start recognizing, okay, you know what, this is a lot of information. This is a lot of ways to connect the dots. How am I going to get it all into one central location?
Right.
And you're starting here, you know, a lot of utilities and cities talk about digital twins. And so part of our planning process and the way we approach AMI, again, it's always, we'll talk about AMI 2.0 or going beyond AMI. And it's really about how do we optimize operations within a utility. And it all goes back to creating this digital twin. Like I mentioned before, that digital twin gives you the ability to understand what's going on now, predicting what may happen. If something does happen, what do you do? And all that is part of this approach. In this roadmap, again, if you were to look at it, we talk about meters, we talk about pipes, we talk about pressure management, water quality, energy optimization. We even talk about how we tie all that into a hydraulic model, making it dynamic versus static. So not only can you use it for planning, now you can use it for operations, but all that feeds into a centralized smart water platform.
Yes.
And again, that creates that digital twin for the utility. And as I mentioned before, all this is really derived from that roadmap that we would create for a client.
So we can do some of the digital twinning type development for utilities, take their information and create that model for them, which is a great, added, I mean, that's a great service because, now they can make informed decisions and know what's going on. When does GHD support like the deployment of platforms? Like, do we help do implementation of the actual software that's, that might be selected, or is that done by the software provider?
So we provide that service too. Obviously, we're agnostic in the industry. So our thing is about bringing the best in class to our clients. So, we do work with various vendors right now and software providers and smart water platforms. But again, it's really understanding the client's need and the best fit. So we have the ability to evaluate the platform based on client's criteria or our criteria. But again, it's always about bringing best in class, and then also being mindful of the budget or the appetite, financial appetite the client may have in looking at a platform.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I would also say to that, that we kind of act in terms of the agency or the utility, we kind of act as an extension of them during the whole process and the whole project. And part of that is you're getting these reads that are coming in, and we're doing a small one down in Central California that's finishing up. So it's about 6,000 meters. And one of their things was like, I used to get 1 meter read a month. Now I'm getting one every 15 minutes. What do I do with all this data? And we have, over the installation project, the time period of that, we've shown them how to, have that data coming in. It has to be transferred into a type of CSV file that can be used to the billing system. And typically the vendor is not going to help with that portion of it, but having it in this certain format allows them to do that, and we help them with that. And then we help them from everything from acting as a go-between, with the vendor, with the installation contractor, and with the utility. So we kind of act as a buffer, because there's always going to be issues that come up. You have an installation contractor that's out there using a monkey wrench on a pipe, and the pipe gets twisted. Well, whose fault is that, and who is responsible for that? And we can help with that.
So
we can do those things.
So when we think about, you mentioned earlier, hey, it's all around, a lot of this AMI is about customer experience type stuff. And I agree, it's a huge component of it, right? But at the end of the day, the utility's like, how much is this going to cost me? How much money am I saving? How much efficiencies can I put into the system? We want the customers to be happy, but we gotta do, if we're gonna do this, we gotta know that we're gonna save water, make money, and it's not gonna cost us an arm and a leg to do this. So talk about how we are helping them understand the ROI, and how long does it take to recoup the cost of the investment before they're starting to really see benefits?
So that's something, and then keep going to the roadmap that we have, and it's divided into five or six different stages. So when we look at return on investment, and again, it really depends on how many meters they're looking to convert. You know, is it 500,000 meters, 100,000 meters, or is it 6,000 meters? Do you want to do them all at one time? You want to do it over, 2-year, 5-year period, or do you stretch it over a 10-year period?
Right.
Really, that's how we help our clients. First of all, is really understanding, the money it's going to take to make this investment, and do you really need to do it all at one time? If not, could you phase it? And that's where some of our digital tools comes in. Like I mentioned, meter analytics. We have the ability to look at all meters at one time, understand which ones are underperforming and how much money you're losing. By understanding that, then we could say, okay, if you want to change out 300,000 meters, really these are the first 50,000, 100,000 you need to focus on based on the amount of water that you're losing, or revenue that you're losing from that. And then the other thing that we do, you mentioned about realizing and the return on investment, how quickly that happens. So when you look at the roadmap that we provide, we talk about the initial beginning. Where do you want to start? What's the vision of your AMI system? And then we start the planning phase. How long is it going to take to deploy these meters? When do you set up your communication network? When do you start that software integration? And then as we're doing all that, you do a soft launch. You start maybe putting in 10,000, 20,000 meters, depending on how much meters you're looking to deploy ultimately. You do a soft launch, and you start realizing some of the benefits. Your customers will start using the portal. You start enhancing that portal. If there's not enough participation, why not? Do we have to do it in another language to get greater participation? And then the other thing too, once that information starts coming in, how do we start using it to empower and enable our employees to optimize operations, start saving on energy and other things like that, and maintenance. And then once we go through that, then we start transitioning from a reactive utility to a proactive utility. So now we're used to the AMI system. We're getting some of the benefits. We're getting some of that return on investment. Now we're going to be a truly AMI-enabled utility. And then we look one more stage, and how do we continue to modernize that system? So again, we're always taking into the fact that this is a major investment initially, but also how do you generate and not ensure that you don't leave any money on the table when you do this investment? But the other thing that we do also in regards to return on investment, we're always looking at other ways to generate revenue from these AMI systems.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I mean, I gotta imagine being in the utilities position, selecting a partner to help them walk through this process, especially if it's new to them and they don't really have a lot of experience. They're doing the old school. It's got to be pretty daunting. Wouldn't you agree?
I completely agree. And, typically, and we go through this process all the time. Obviously there's the request for qualifications, request for proposal. But, most utilities, like with any major investment, and this is what's unique about this investment or this project, is that it touches every business unit within a utility organization. Unlike you're building a pipeline or a new water plant, AMI truly touches every business unit. So, being mindful of that, when we go through this process, and utilities, again, are well acquainted with RFQ process, what they're looking for is, does the company really have the credibility and experience and really understand the water industry and the AMI industry well? The other thing too, are they bringing in innovation, not just the same old thing? There's a lot of clients that do invest in AMI systems, and then a year, 2 years after that initial deployment, they're not truly realizing the benefits that were initially calculated. So that's something that we really look at is, we want to ensure that these outcomes are going to happen. So, we also structure the RFQ process differently when we're the owner's rep. So not only do we just look at technical qualifications, and that's what the industry's done the past 15 years. If you were to look at a typical solicitation for an owner's rep, which would be like GHD, basically the previous consultant will cut and paste, and it's all about specs on the communication network, specs on the meter, specs on outreach. But in reality, like I said, when we write RFPs, RFQs, we're really looking for that creative perspective, the innovation. What else can you do? How else can the client benefit? So we don't limit, the thinking just to meet the requirements. It's also explain to us how you're going to meet them now and in the future.
Gotcha.
And if I could just add one thing to that, I think the difference with GHD also is that, being a global firm, obviously, and we have so many different capabilities. Some of the other consulting firms that we go against, this is all they do. They do water meters and AMI implementation, whereas we can come in and we have asset management, right? Because asset management is a huge part of an AMI system, I think, and going to AMI. We have engineering, we have construction management. We can help them with replacing customer service lines, because those can be put in poorly, and those have leaks. And we sometimes when you start putting the meters in, you can find out that all your customer service lines are bad in certain areas, depending on what material they used or how it was installed. And we can help design that. We can help oversee the installation, and we can help with all those areas also. So I think that's a big plus.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, and all the analytics behind, digital analytics, but that's got to be a huge, capability that maybe the competitors aren't, offering, along with the digital twin development. It just seems like so I'm thinking, you've got a utility that says, I really want to get into AMI, but I don't know that I could go all the way. I don't think I can, really deploy 5,000 or 6,000 units. But what if they were to say, because I'm thinking not all valves or meters are the same. What if they had big, junction meters, hey, in the trunk line, I've got a meter here and I get real time here, and I can start to dissect regions of my neighborhoods, but maybe not at the individual, level. Is there value in that type of a strategy to, step into it in a stepwise process over time versus the whole enchilada at once?
And there is, Sean, and I'm sure Rick will add to this. So, and it's well known in the industry, a lot of your water loss and a lot of the revenue that you're not capturing really come from your large meters. So
Okay. Yep.
typically, we'll advise our clients, maybe focus on your large meters first and do some analytics just to see how they're performing. And then, the other thing too is as we start looking at different areas within the city with their limited budget, again, using analytics, we know exactly which meter is underperforming. So, and one thing I didn't mention is that, that analytic also has the expected remaining useful life of that meter. So again, by having that information and understanding the client's budget, obviously we know where we need to start, and then basing, those meter retrofits or replacements based on that data analytic solution that we have. But one thing I want to stress is that, we can phase it, but ultimately, like I said, at some point they're going to need to go full deployment for the entire city to get real benefit from this.
So we talk about AMI and we're talking about what it is, but it sounds like there's a new version of it coming out, this AMI 2.0. How are utilities leveraging AMI 2.0 or even going beyond AMI, Freddie? I mean, we're kind of weaving some of these points in, but can we be more specific here in this part of the discussion?
Yeah. So, actually we've been talking about it the past 40 minutes, but when you look at AMI 1.0, it was all about better meter reading and better billing and providing some information to the customer.
But now we got the two-way stuff, and it's a game changer with all the other sensor capabilities, and that's what we're talking about.
Exactly. It's we still want to enhance that customer experience, but now it's really shifting on the operational side. How do we enable, empower staff to get value from the AMI system? But really, how do we leverage that AMI system to get greater visibility and control of our distribution system? So really, that's what that AMI 2.0 is.
Gotcha. Well, how is GHD Digital disrupting the AMI industry?
I'll provide some quick examples here, and I'll have Rick chime in. But you've been hearing us talk a lot about this meter analytic solution, and it's really a disruptor in the industry. Because again, in the past, when you would do cost benefit analysis, you would use historical data from the city, 3-5 years of information, and you would make these conservative estimates and projections. What the payoff may be, the payback, and how long it would be. By actually using analytics, and again, this is an algorithm that's been trained, we now know exactly how well those meters are performing, how much water is being lost, how much revenue is being unaccounted for, and then remaining useful life. So that's one way we're disrupting the industry, is by using analytics to really pinpoint where we need to start. The other thing that we're working on too, and Rick's been part of this, is that we're using visual analytics or computer vision. So basically what happens is that when a city elects to move forward with an AMI system, the contractor, the vendor will go out and install these meters. And the contractor is required to document everything about that meter. So they take photographs of the old meter, they'll write down the old register reading on the old meter, and then they'll take photographs of the new installation. So part of being a consultant or trusted advisor for utilities, they would hire us to oversee the program, but then also we do quality control checks out in the field. And again, if we're talking about 100, 200,000 meters, there's no way we could check each one to confirm the accuracy of the installation. So now we're taking those photographs that the contractor takes, and we're training the algorithm to say, okay, these photographs are bad installations and these are good installations.
Yeah.
So now on new projects, when we have all these photographs, we will feed them into this algorithm, and basically it's going to denote which ones are questionable or which ones are installed incorrectly. So now we have the ability to not only QC 100% of the meters, now we can hone our inspection resources a lot better versus just randomly selecting 2-5% of the metering population. We can go where the issues really are.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I would just add to that incorrectly can mean many different things. Freddie was saying it could be as simple as not tightening the meter spuds enough. The water is leaking out of that. You may not know about that depending on where you live and how the water flows. Maybe the water just goes straight down, and it doesn't surface. It could go on for a couple of years, because now you're not looking in that meter box anymore, because it's being read by AMI. So you could go 2 years without opening a meter box and looking at the meter. And the other thing that it can be is that this happened to us, and we did a project in San Bruno, and the meter A needs to be installed on house A. Well, if you put meter A on house B, and you're not checking that could go, because you have two houses, they're using about the same amount of water, and one house is using extraordinarily extra amount. It may go on for a while, and you're billing house A for customer B's water, and that was happening. And we didn't figure that out until it was a summer vacation, and one of the houses was gone for 3 months, and they came back and said, wait a minute, we didn't use any water. And that's how we figured that out.
Well, I could see that'd be a problem.
Yeah. And maybe it's not a huge, you're talking, dollars or tens of dollars, but it's just the confidence of the customer. Also, you'd be like, you don't know where my meters is located, but you're billing me for a meter that's not my meter. I mean, so again, customer relations is important with that.
Well, I mean, just think if you live in a duplex or a quadplex or something like that, right? I mean, the meters, are they designed to, have that much definition at the meter box, where this apartment here's got his, and I mean, yeah. Okay, good, good. Well, here's a question for you. What's the like percentage of the type of clients that GHD is working with, versus, is it like municipalities, or is it, private utilities, where does that sit for us? Because, some of that seems to be, maybe you have more of an adoption from a private utility on AMI versus a public utility with AMI? I mean, is there any difference there? Do you see any trends in that?
So, yeah, most of the work we do are for public utilities. And, for private utilities, they have transitioned to AMI a lot quicker than public utilities because obviously they're running their organization as a business
Hmm.
and they need to make a profit. So it is important that they streamline and have the most efficient processes and tools when it's a private utility. But again, like I said, most of the work we do is on the public sector side. And then what's interesting too, Sean, the question that you pose, we're actually looking at some potential projects in the state of New York, actually in the Manhattan, New York City area. There's a lot of real estate companies now that see the value of AMI and having the ability to have individual meters within their buildings, even on different floors, to know how much water is being used, much more efficient they could be, because this is all ESG related. So we're
Right.
also seeing now AMI go into that space too.
Right. Right. Well, does AMI help with like the whole circular economy strategies of water?
So, when I look at circular economy and AMI, really, I see it three ways. One is about resource efficiency. We've been talking a lot about it, about using water more efficiently, conserving water. But when you look at the other aspect of it, when we talked about, manual reads, the traditional meter reading process is very wasteful. It's paper driven. You're driving these routes. So really, when you look at circular economy, there's that waste reduction part of it, because now when you have AMI, you have less trucks rolling out, you have less paper being used. And then the last thing I wanted to mention too is really it's the product life cycle, or the life of that product's being extended. So a lot of the products we've used in the past, had a shelf life, maybe 5, 10, 20 years, really depending on the product and the system that we're talking about. But now that some of these products that we're using in these AMI systems have a longer shelf life and require less maintenance. So again, when we talk about circular economy, it's really those three things that really stand out for me.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, that's good to hear. Okay. Well, let's do this. Let's go into a little bit of a lightning round, so to speak. We're kind of getting towards the end of the interview here, and we've had such a great conversation. And I know we could go a lot longer because my mind keeps thinking about questions that I just want to keep pinging you guys. But I think I better just kind of hold back a little bit, or we might have to be going way long. Hey, what if Let's see. Um, if you're sitting in a utility's shoes, where can GHD Digital provide the biggest value with the digital innovation and technology services we offer?
I think for me, it's really a lot of our competitors, and we do this too. We talk about digital transformation, and that scares a lot of utilities and cities because when you talk about digital transformation, it's about changing the way they operate, and it's new systems, it's new technology, it's big money. So if we're sitting in the chair office of, say, of a director, assistant director, or whatever at a utility, really where we bring the best value, it's about digital optimization. And the difference with that and transformation is that we're focusing on how do we improve your existing processes, your systems, the way you work, um, to basically enhance it. Again, take advantage of technology, new ways of working. But again, it's smaller dollars. It's taking small steps because again, when we talk about digital transformation in the water utility, there's a lot of people fearful of it. You lose your job. It's really complicated. But when we talk about digital optimization, everybody wants to do that. Everybody's focused on how do we maximize our OpEx, our operation and maintenance spend. How
Right.
can we make that better? Because um, when you see the federal dollars and state dollars, there's less and less money for these major capital investments. So everybody's focused on OpEx. So when again, the best value that we can provide through our services is focused on digital optimization versus transformation.
Well, it kind of probably leads to this next question, though, is where do you see the biggest opportunities in the market over the next 5 years?
So I'll let Rick answer after I do, but really, I think the biggest thing, and you hear this over and over, whether it's private industry or public industry or sector, it's about customer enhancement or customer experience. Everything is going to be customer centric. So really, that's where the biggest opportunity is for a water utility is understanding their clients better. being able to meet the needs when they have that need.
Hmm.
So, for example, I may get on the website and I want to click a button and say, hey, what's going on in my backyard?
Yeah.
Again, that's the customer expectation now and in the future. So that's really where I see the biggest, I guess, space in the market that needs to be addressed in the next 5 years is really how do we take advantage of the technology, the process and tools that we have to enhance that customer experience? Because again, you see it on the private sector side. Amazon's probably the best one. It's predicting what I'm going to order. You should send me texts and emails about what I should be looking at next. That's the way a government should be in 5, 10 years from now, is really anticipating that next need of customers.
Sure, sure. Britt?
Well, I was just going to add that, the whole smart city thing, if you look at the LoRaWAN technology or a couple other different technologies, you can use, cities are using that to, estimate or predict streetlights. They're using it to determine if a garbage can, a dumpster is full enough to have to send a guy out to empty it. Well,
Yeah.
because you're on a regular schedule and you're picking that dumpster up every week. Well, what if it's only a third full every week? Why send somebody out to empty that? And the technology that is tied with and to AMI can help with that. As simply as helping you to determine the best times to use your washer and dryer. There's all kinds of things like that. And I think that's where it's going. And that's the exciting part. And I think that's what people want,
What I think you're right. And if another area I was thinking about is, what about water quality? I mean, with these meters themselves as well. Like, oh, my hardness in my water is this, you need to update and maybe increase your water softener at the house. I mean, what if the customer had alerts on that to support the water utility? I mean, are we thinking that that's where this is going beyond as well?
So two things there, Sean, yeah, there is a trend for utilities to get into the house and take advantage of those smart water devices or smart devices in a home. Like Rick had mentioned, imagine, 5 years from now, you want to put clothes into a washer and it's going to tell you now's the wrong time to do it because of the water demand and energy tariff. Here's the best time to do it. But going back to your question about water quality, it's really about from the house into the utility system. So as I mentioned before, there are products out there now, water meters, that have the ability to measure temperature and pressure. So there's utilities like the city of Houston, there's some utilities in Tennessee looking at this, is how do we correlate the temperature that's being registered by these residential meters into water age? And for example, if water age, which really equals water quality, if it starts exceeding 48 hours, 72 hours, based on this intelligence, how do we automate the flushing of our system to ensure water quality is maintained and that level of service is being maintained? So
Yeah.
those are some of the things that are happening within the industry.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, the last question I had for you guys, I was going to throw out there was, in your opinion, who's got, some of the best AMI technology in this space right now that we as a consultant would recommend? I mean, I think listeners are going to go, we're talking all this great platform stuff and these tools, but like, who are these people? We don't know. So tell us, what do you think?
I want to defer to Rick on that question.
Well, I think you have to look at the big players, right? The Neptune, the Census, the Badger. They've always been there, and they're always going to be stable, and they're always going to be good products. But then you also have other companies, Camstrup and Deal, and even Metron Fournier and Master Meter. They don't have as big of a slice of the pie. But it's kind of like, do you want to buy a Ford, or maybe you want to buy a Rivian, the new truck coming out. But I think you have to go into the agency, and what we do during our feasibility study is we take a look at all the technologies. We'll look at 8 to 10 different technologies and determine what the best, maybe the best fit would be for that agency. And
Right.
you can't just come in and say, and there are other consulting firms will do this. They'll say, well, here's a list of them all. This is what we think is the best one. Well, one has a cellular reading capability, and maybe you don't have. We are actually working with one in Arizona right now. They don't have assets or the height to be able to put up a fixed base system. You have to have, 70, 80 feet where you can put those towers. Well, they can't do that. So you have to look at other technology. And then, also what is it you're looking for is what Freddie was going into. Are you interested in the leak detection? Are you interested in the pressure management? There's going to be one vendor right now that's better than another vendor. And so, you can always talk about the big players, like I said, the Neptune, the Badger, the Sensitive, but you have to look at all of them and see what fits that utility the best. And I think that's when you have a relationship with that utility and you're working with them on their business case and their feasibility from the very beginning to the end of the project, or at least to procurement, when you're going to go out to bid for the vendor, you learn what they want and what they can handle and how to move forward with that.
Gotcha.
So, Sean, one last thing I want to mention in closing here is, from my perspective, and you look at the future, it's about static meters. So there's mechanical meters that have moving parts, which has been traditionally in the industry. But really, a lot of the names, including Mueller, are offering, these static meters. And really, the future is a meter that has the ability to obviously read water consumption, but also temperature, pressure, vibration, whatever it is, and have the ability to have that remote shut off. Really, that's where the future is. So a lot of the AMI vendors that we interface with have that ability or are looking to provide that capability to their clients. So it's having that product, but then also them having the foresight to start connecting to these smart water platforms. And that's really what we look for, or the recommendations we make, is that vendor's ability to extend their ecosystem to not only just provide that meter or that communication network, but really provide a full turnkey system that's going to provide the greatest value to our clients.
Yeah, one last question has come to mind. So if you got a utility who really wants to do this, sometimes these utilities are governed by, a municipality or some other government agency that basically says you can only charge this much or you can only do this much. How do you amateurize over a period of time through your calculations? I'm assuming you're doing this, that is going to say, hey, we're going to add a technology fee to, your bill to cover these new enhancements that's going to improve your water quality, your usage, yada, yada. How do we handle that with them? And is that part of this exercise with the work we do in our consulting services?
So really, that's a new business model that you're talking about. In the past, that entire risk, the entire cost of that system has been put on the shoulders of the ratepayers and customers. So we are working with some clients that are being mindful of that, and they're also looking at different alternative delivery methods. So, for example, performance contracting, where again, an energy savings company comes in, says, okay, we'll put the entire system for you in. You don't pay us until you start realizing the benefits of that system. So the utility is really, there's no money out of their pocket. It doesn't impact their CIP. So that's one avenue. And then there's another business model that's called managed meter services. So the same thing, a vendor could come in, install all the meters, and basically the utility's leasing the system at a discounted price. And then there's network as a service, where a vendor would come in, put up that two-way communication network or whatever network that they're looking at. And the maintenance, the operation of that system goes back to the AMI vendor, and there's a discounted cost to the city and utility. So, there's different ways that utilities are looking to minimize that impact or that cost to their customers.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So there's a lot to think through. There's a lot of
Yes.
options here. There's a lot of, players in the market too, that can, provide value or, kind of, control some things that maybe we don't want them to control.
Exactly.
Like there's a hook.
Yes.
There's got to be a hook somewhere on some of that too, that you got to be concerned about, right? With some of these
Always. Yes.
Well, I would just add one thing to that also, to what Freddie was saying, is that if you can, and some agencies are a little reluctant to actually use this, but if you can show the utility that their payback, and they're going to have more accurate meters, they're going to be able to identify water loss, they may recoup some of those fees. You're not using as much for pumping, for chemicals, for sending out into the system. You're not losing your water as much anymore. Then you don't have to raise rates.
Right.
You know, there's that possibility also.
Right. No,
Yeah.
this is good. Well, look, guys, I really appreciate you guys coming on the show today. Lots of really good conversation around AMI and the value of deploying this with utilities. I think we could cover more topics on this over time, and maybe what we'll do is set us up some more time down the road to come back and maybe talk about some use cases where we've helped utilities. And I think that would be good for our listeners to hear how things have been implemented. So really appreciate you coming on the show today, Freddie and Rick.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I had a great time.
Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
You bet.
Take care.